Good morning. This is the Highway podcast, and again, I've got my friend from Germany, Heiko, on the line, and we're going to pick up where we left off on part 2, where we were talking about ego, character, and we briefly mentioned we're going to talk about small weapons, dirks, cudgels, and lots of other stuff. And just prior to coming on here, me and Heiko were talking about the MacGregor method, and we're going to go and look at that as well. So if you don't know what the MacGregor method's all about, if you're a martial artist, you need to listen in. So morning, Heiko, how are you?
Good morning, I'm fine. How are you?
Oh, great. Yeah. All the better for having seen you. With your cup of coffee. I haven't got prepared with a cup of tea or anything.
Oh no, that's not good. Preparation is everything.
No, preparation is everything. Absolutely. So I just want to go back to what we were talking about the last time. We finished off talking about, essentially leading a simple life, leaving the ego behind, and really getting back in touch with, what's really important. We talked about family and things like that the last time. And I noticed that you've started a page called The Simple Man, right? Which is sort of something quite close to my heart. I run a meditation group. I've always been involved in sort of Zen and things like that. And that always is about minimalism, about getting rid of the clutter and not taking yourself too seriously. So what made you set up that page? How did that come about?
So I kind of try to improve my habits already for a longer time. But since around 2 years, I was really jumping head forward into topics like minimalism, stoicism, essentialism, call it whatever you want. So the philosophy of how to live a simpler life, not only when it comes to consuming things, or to be more deliberately when you consume stuff, but also mentally. So how to keep things simple, not to overthink stuff. And the idea then just popped into my mind for a while now to maybe create a website, maybe to create a blog, to write about my experiences with it, to share this. But I thought before I center too much on myself, like, oh, here I am, this is my way into minimalism and whatnot, I thought, no, it would be better to make a Facebook group. So The Simple Man is a Facebook group which is open and dedicated to all those who are into topics like minimalism, stoicism, living a simpler life, living more deliberately, and so on and so on. So the idea was to find like-minded people, to exchange, and to see how this works as an exchanging platform for like-minded people. So I was also quite picky about who I will take. So I was trying to see who on my friends list is make the impression that this is something for him or her. You know what I mean? So you can see, I try to read the algorithms, trying to create
the Heiko algorithm. That's going to be a new one.
You might be interested in such a thing. So I collected some people now. That doesn't mean if I did not invite somebody on my friend list to this group yet, that doesn't mean that I don't like them. Okay.
No.
It's just that I think maybe they are in some way or another too politically from their posts, which I want to keep out of this group. So no politics in the sense of people going on each other's throats right now. I want to keep this out. So people who are a little bit too political, in my opinion, or who are very active in politics, that people, I said, okay, not now. I go step by step. I think the first members were like 10 people, and then I was selecting a little bit more and looking into it, because I want to have people who really get it. And of course, there are also still people on my friends list where I say, yeah, maybe this is something for him or her, but I will, go baby steps. Okay,
Yeah.
baby steps. And once in a while, I will check my friends list, and maybe I see something someone posts, and I said, yeah, I think he is the guy, or she is the one who might be interested in this group too. So yeah, taking it simple and taking it slow also with this Facebook group. And maybe from then there will evolve. I have already some plans in my head. Maybe they will evolve the blog I have in mind, or a website, maybe even a YouTube channel, a separate YouTube channel about it.
Yeah,
I don't know if people want to hear a German talk with his accent in English about minimalism and stuff, but maybe, I mean, people are interested in my sword stuff. Maybe they are interested in this kind of thing. And yeah.
The whole thing about the simple man as well, I think it fits in quite nicely. What struck me, first of all, was that it fits in nicely with some of the old Gaelic ways, the Highland ways, historically, because obviously at that period in time, life was simpler. It was brutal, but it was simpler, and people weren't consumed by, products and ideas and advertising and indeed politics, apart from the politics that existed between the clans, but there were things like, honor and integrity. These things were important. And I think obviously life was simpler back then. And I don't know whether that was in the back of your mind as well, or whether it was just something purely based on your experiences of living, life in a simpler way.
Well, yeah, I think we can learn from older periods, but I think we should be also careful to not idealize former times, because we did not live there. There are many things which are much better today, like women rights and how we treat our children, and the technology we have, the medical technology we have, and so on and so on. So I'm quite happy to live in modern times, but on the other side, there's always improvement, and I think in some ways, with the age of industrialization, humans started to move away from their original nature, and I think a lot of things within our body, our minds, our biochemicals, our genetics is unchanged since the Stone Age.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So we have this, we know it from martial arts, we have this fight or flight reflex. We have several other things which we have no control, which are just within us as our, genetical heritage from like ever, mankind stepped on the planet and started to use tool and make fire and whatnot, and starting to socialize with each other. I think what's the difference today compared to maybe former times is it's quite more hectical, and technology is not only good, it is also sometimes a curse. So in our case now, it's great that we have this technology to chat about it from UK to Germany and share it with other people. But everybody knows that all the messages on your smartphone, all the emails, all the feeling of having to be available all the time, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Even when you are on vacation, your boss calls you because something important came in, and all these things. I think this is quite stressful for us. This is, of course, not as hard as plow a field like a peasant in the medieval times, okay? But I think it's very stressful for our minds. I think our brains are much more overwhelmed than the brains of our forefathers.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, advertising online, you scroll through social media, or you check on Google, you go on YouTube, whatnot, and you are overwhelmed by advertising. Advertising is everywhere. If you have advertising in the radio or in the TV, you can turn it off. But if you used your email, and you have to use your emails today because it's a modern tool, then you will, have these pop-ups with advertising. And I think this is something very important, especially when it comes to the education of our kids, because there's something going completely wrong, in my opinion. And the simple man is one way to, fight a little bit, pushing a little bit against this trend of being all this, everything on the surface, all this is a little bit fake. You don't know what's the real truth is. People think about global problems, even though they don't even solve their own problems at home with their own kids. And they think about, how to feed poor kids in Africa, which is an important thing. But
yeah,
you're an average Joe. What will you do? You're not even treating your own kids correctly. How will you help some poor kids in Africa, for example? So, many people can treat their own kids very good and still help poor people somewhere in the world. So that's totally okay. But I think the average man, the average woman, the average person has a problem with being overwhelmed by all this information we got, and we don't even know today what is true and what is fake.
That's true. Yeah, I think getting back to basics is good. And yes, you're right. I mean, some of the elements of former times are pretty horrendous. The way people were treated, healthcare, the advances in science. So the advances in science are important, but I think they've been allowed to be controlled by a small group of people, haven't they, to a certain extent? And you've mentioned advertisers. It seems like the media really control what's going on politically as well as socially. And I think sometimes it's good to take a step back from it and just sort of recalibrate yourself, you know what I mean, to the wider world. As you said, nature, getting back in with nature. I remember taking a student of mine who was a scaffolder, a heavy drinker, smoker, worked hard, was all over the place. And I took him down to the Brecon Beacons, which is hills in South Wales. And I used to take a lot of guys down there, teach them map reading and survival skills and that type of thing. And he had a bit of an epiphany. We were sitting on a side of a hill, having a brew, having a cup of tea. It had just been raining. The clouds had gone flying across the hills. It was a beautiful, typical Welsh sort of weekend. Rain, sun, every season you could imagine. And he turned round to me, and it was really quiet. Things went really silent. And he turned, and he was a big, tough guy, never been in touch with his emotions or anything. He turned around to me and he said, Bob, said, that was brilliant. And I said, what was brilliant? He said, I've just heard a crow fly past and I could hear its wings.
Yeah.
And he was like, and I said, yeah. I said, you've never done that before, have you? He said, no, I've never actually I've never noticed that ever before, but it must be there all the time. And I said, yeah, it's about tuning in to what's going on around you and being in the present moment. And he now lives in South Wales and has horses. And so he moved out, he packed it all in and moved out of the city. Yeah. And it's amazing what an impact those experiences can have on people if people are reminded,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's what the simple man thing said to me, and luckily I'm on that list. Yay.
Yeah, I think that's a great story because it shows how even one small change of a habit, can open your mind for changing a lot of things. And of course, you shouldn't. There are some people who need their time to change step by step.
Oh yeah.
And there are people who are like, no, everything or nothing. I jump now, head in, straight forward, and I change everything because otherwise I will not make it. Okay, we have those people who stop smoking step by step, and we have those people who just have to stop one moment for the other, breaking their cigarettes, throwing them away, and now I don't smoke anymore, never start again. Yeah. So, and the Simple Man now is a website for women and men to exchange about it, because what a simple life is, or simpler life, simpler living means, is different for everyone. So it's totally okay. Minimalism is, for example, not a concept, not a plan you have to stick to. There are no rules. There are just advices, sharing of experiences. So this is what I did. This is what was good for me. So some people say, okay, if I wear the same dress every day, I don't feel overwhelmed by my closet anymore. That doesn't mean everybody has to wear black t-shirts. Even so, you see most minimalist bloggers wearing black t-shirts, and so do I, because I already loved black t-shirts back then. But yeah, for me it makes things just simpler, even so I'm wearing now a club shirt, but this is uniform. This is not this is not my all-day clothes. No, but what I want to say was that a simpler life can mean different things for everybody. And for me, it's still a journey. So I'm still on this journey, and it also helps me with my martial arts journey, because especially in HEMA, but I think also I experience this in other martial arts. Sometimes people are a little bit like, oh yeah, German longsword is cool, and Highland broadsword is cool, and oh look, there's Montanti, and oh cool, the Bartitsu stick stuff, and they do too much, in my opinion. So they do like 5 different weapons from 3 different periods, from like 10 different manuals. And I think this is the moment where I say, okay, you spend a lot of money for swords, you don't really know how to use. Okay, look at one tradition, take one tradition. So for example, I dare to say I'm focusing now completely on Scottish martial arts, on the martial arts of the 18th century connected with the Highland regiments and the Highland clans. And I know people who are, for example, Ton Pui is on this way with La Verdadera Destreza, the Spanish rapier system, and the Iberian Montante, the 2-handed greatsword, and the so-called common Iberian method. So he focuses on this part of it. And there are people who focusing on whatever Bolognese tradition completely, or on Joachim Meyer completely. And I think this is the best way. I think these are, in my opinion, the best groups and the best instructors, because they don't have too much. Because everybody we all have, some of us, a few of us are maybe full-time martial arts instructors, but most of the people have a different day job, and there's a passion next to this, and they have maybe taken care of family or of their parents and whatnot, and you only have so little time. So focus on something which you really like, which is really important, and then you can get really good there. So for example, a guy who is hitting the boxing gym like 3 to 5 times a week will be a better fighter, and I think also a much more balanced person maybe than a guy who goes to BJJ on Monday, to Wing Chun on Tuesday, Muay Thai on Friday, and in between go to Aikido, and you know what I mean. So
I know. I have students who say to me, they train like that. They'll train with me on a Monday night, they'll go to BJJ on a Wednesday night, and on a Friday night they'll go to Eskrima. But they don't train in between times. They don't train in the garden at home. And you can see that their progress is being stilted by all of these different ideas. Yes, we're all doing the same thing, but the style is very different. The style of Muay Thai is very different to karate, for example. Although we're just hitting things with our hands and our elbows and stuff, it's a very different style. And as you say, the difference between the styles of swords as well is quite distinctive. The stance, the footwork, like between Polish sabre and Highland, the stance is completely different. The Polish stuff is almost like a Thai boxing stance, almost, virtually square on. Whereas in broadsword, there's more of an angle, obviously. But yeah, people think that they can learn all of these different things. And I always say to these students, I say, look, just as you've said, pick the one and stick with it. Give it a couple of years. And they sort of look at you and go, what, a couple of years? And you go, well, yeah, because that's the other thing that's happening. People, because of the technology and our age of everything's really fast, people want to get that. They want to be qualified now. It's like, how come I failed the exam? Well, because you weren't good enough. But I thought I'd get the certificate. Oh, no, it's not about the certificate. It's about taking part. As you've said, it's about the journey.
Right.
And I think people get, they have this goal in mind that they're going to get a black belt. And if they don't get it in a set time, then they'll go and do something else. There's this distraction going on constantly. And it's quite infuriating, because my Thai boxing teacher, even though I'd been doing Muay Thai for nearly 12 years, my teacher, Pimu, my second teacher, made me walk for 3 days in the gym. Just
Yeah,
walking.
you told.
He just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure my footwork was good and my guard was correct.
Yeah.
And that's the way to do it. But people don't want to do that. They want more complexity. They think there should be more when in fact they need less.
Yeah.
Which is what I guess you've been on about, with the simple man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think when you simplify things down, there's a certain clarity, if you like. You start to see things that much clearer. And I know from having recently taken up the sword, I had that same joy and pleasure of simplicity as I had when I first started martial arts. It was quite interesting because I've become a student again, which is taking things back to the basics. And I think people lose that. And this is what it is about having simplicity in your life. Let's pare everything back and start again and look afresh, and not constantly try and get to this goal that is constantly changing. It's the dance that's more important, not the end of the dance. When you're dancing, it's the dance. You don't want to stop if it's going well. There is no goal when it comes to dancing. So I tend to tell people, you got to think of life like a dance. It's just going to keep going on. There is no end to it. It's brilliant. You don't know what's going to happen at the end. And you get that sense of, I guess, tranquility and unperturbedness, if there's such a word, that the Greeks called ataraxia, which was actually found on the battlefield by soldiers. That state of, they're so in tune in the moment, in the middle of combat, in the height of all of this cacophony, that they were able to function. And the Greeks, I don't know whether you've heard that word, ataraxia. It's quite an important word when it comes to fighting of any kind. And the Greeks noticed that it happened on the battlefield. In the time of Alexander, it was noticed. And the Greeks constantly they strived to achieve that state off the battlefield. So that's something I've been writing about on my blogs and stuff.
That's quite interesting. You should share it in the Simple Man group because it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think I will. Because it applies also to combat as well, to self-defense and to normal life as well, of course. The whole of, because sometimes the whole of life itself can be a bit of a battle. We've just been talking about dealing with advertisers, with the internet, with the, the desire to be better than everybody else and the ego coming into it.
Yeah, you have to, in life, as in fighting, you have to know when you have to use, when you have to guard yourself, when you have to keep your guard, when you have to be aware, when you have to be, ready to fight back, to strike, and so on and so on. I think these taking combat mentality and putting it into all-day life, I think that's something we see in many cultures. Of when you were talking about the Greeks, I was thinking about Musashi and his famous book of the Five Rings, which of this, strategy self-help book for everyone. I think it's a little bit over commercialized in a way over the years, but still there is some truth in this book. But you can also learn a lot about life by a very solid, simple man like Donald McBain.
Absolutely.
Kind of would I dare say to the kind of the European book of Five Rings, maybe in some way he's sharing his amazing story. And I think that's something quite important in life and also in combat. And I think the point is that when you, as a martial artist, if you don't want to overwhelm yourself by stuffing too much into yourself with like, oh, there's this and there's that and there, don't think about kicking correctly. Learn how to, box correctly, for example. And this is what I see when I see martial arts instructors who are doing a really good job. And there are really some, from different martial arts, some instructors which I really admire, where I say, this is great work. I really like their approach. And you see, they are not hectical. They are taking their time and they are learning the stuff. So An example, Tommy Joe Moore, who you had as an example, also as a guest in your podcast. I find his approach amazing because he's focusing on this Bartitsu, unarmed, weaponized self-defense combat. And he really knows his stuff because he knows judo, he knows boxing, he knows savate, and he knows different other martial arts. But this is his base, and he's using this to understand and explore Bartitsu not only as a historical martial art, but also for modern purposes. And I think what I like about the Highland broadsword is, for me, similar to boxing, it is simple in the most positive way of the word. Okay, most positive meaning of the word, and that sometimes might make look Highland broadsword less attractive compared maybe for German longsword, because German longsword is all these fancy windings and stuff, and also this crude sword, and looks like Lord of the Rings and everything. And then you have, of course, the Highlanders. They have a reputation as being fierce warriors and whatnot. But the Highland broadsword itself, when you show the people the style, then you see that some people are a little bit not really disappointed, but they are more like, okay, that's it, 7 cuts, some guards, and a little bit of footwork, and okay, what comes next? And I think, no, this is important. You learn this. I like simple martial arts, like boxing, kendo, like the Highland broadsword. A simple set of lessons, drills you can switch and exchange and combine in a new way. And you really learn how to fight. So when we were talking about sparring earlier, I think in Highland broadsword, I dare to say this is one of the martial arts where you can push people into sparring quite early. Not too soon, of course. It depends on how the progress is. But when you have your guards, and you only need 3 guards. You need outside guard, inside guard, hanging guard. All the other guards are, situational, in between something. But if you look at sparring, you will see most of the people use the hanging guard, or kind of the St. George guard, guarding their head, guarding their inside, guarding their outside, and that's it. Of course, you have all the other things with inside, outside, half hanger, and half circle guard, which I don't like, to be honest. But and then you have 7 cuts, and of these 7 cuts, some cuts work best for you and work most of the time in sparring. And so you see all the Highland broadsword manuals we use, or the broadsword manuals we use, they are often in the base quite the same, with some little differences. Some likes to hold the arm more straight in the guard, the other more crooked and whatnot. But essentially, they have outside guard, inside guard, hanging guard. They have the cuts. They have the same, or close to the same footwork. And then everyone is special techniques, some techniques or some concepts he is using a lot more than another broadsword manual uses it. And then, of course, you have a couple of very fancy techniques, but only a couple of. And I think most of these techniques were also a little bit kind of a show off, to show like, look how dominant I am. And I think these are the most spectacular things. And I saw recently a video about a very self-defense oriented old karate style. I don't know, Uchi Ryo or something.
Oh, Weichi Ryu. Yeah, Weichi. Yeah.
And and there was like, the guy told this karate nerd, I don't know his name, he has an interesting channel. He says, they only had originally 3 cutters, but to take part in competition with showing cutters which are more spectacular, and because of also promoting their art in Okinawa after the war, to say, look, here I am, this is what I can do. They needed to do something more spectacular, because otherwise they would not attract people in public. And I think this is always a little bit a problem of good, effective, but simple looking martial arts, to show off. And very often the people want to have the most easiest way, like the secret Mr. Spock pressure point.
Yeah.
And then no, if you want to get a fighter, you have to sweat and bleed, and some tears. You have to get used to pain and everything. And I think Highland broadsword offers that. And the good thing is, if you say, okay, I want to learn more about fighting than only boxing, because I know how to box, but I also want to learn how to grapple, to wrestle, and to have a little bit more. Boxing is my main tool, but I want to have a little bit more of other things into it to be more prepared for other situations.
Yeah.
And I think there are ways to do that without training a complete new martial art next to your main martial art. I mean, it's totally okay if you train boxing and judo. These are two great martial arts with everything you need. Or Muay Thai and wrestling. We all saw this in the earlier times of the UFC.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Were training boxing and BJJ, and they were ready to go into the ring and face all sorts of fighters who trained like kickboxing and judo, for example. So, and I think with weapon combat you can do it similar.
Yeah, I think it's like this. What I liked about the broadsword when I first started getting interested in it, I'd done a lot of Krabi Krabong and a lot of Eskrima, and years of Krabi Krabong, which is a Thai, for those that don't know, it's a Thai weapon system. And Krabi Krabong is based on essentially about 9 different movements, 9 strikes. And you can apply those strikes and those movements to a single sword, dab, or song dab, a double sword, a sword and maisok, a wooden elbow, or 2 wooden elbows, or a staff, or a spear, or a shield and dagger, and of course, the simplicity of it is there because they had to train soldiers to fight with it very quickly on the battlefield, just as they did with, the Highlanders. They had to have techniques that were easy to learn. If you practiced them, they were very effective, and it was just repetition of the basics. And Muay Thai is like that as well, which is what attracted me to Muay Thai from karate. Karate, we had, like 12, 15 katas to learn. You had all these fancy moves. And when I started doing Thai boxing, it was like, you punch like this, you do these elbows, a knee and a kick, and a bit of clinch work. And the teacher's job was to spot what you were good at initially and then focus on that. And that's what you would use in your fights. You wouldn't, if you weren't good at kicking, then you'd use your kicks to set up your hands and your clinch work and your knees and your elbows. And it's the same with the weapon systems, keeping it simple and stupid is the best way. And it comes back to the simple man again, doesn't it?
Right.
It's that whole principle of simplicity. But people want, as you've said, with Wei Chiryu, they had 3 katas. I think it was Sanchin. I think it was, I'll probably be in trouble if I get them wrong, Super Run Pay and one other. And a lot of them were like open hand techniques.
Right.
Based on close range fighting. Yeah. And it changed, as you say, post-war. People wanted to learn it, so in order to promote it, they added more stuff, and which really spoiled it in a sense. It lost its effectiveness, I guess. But of course, if you want people to come into your dojo and train, you have to keep it varied and you have to keep it interesting, And that's a shame, really, because it misses the point of effective self-protection. Self-protection, self-defense is always very, very, very simple. Yeah. And more often than not relies on that more than these,
Right.
Which, 99% of it is psychological. And you can prevent an altercation or prevent a fight going further by using that strength of will and that strength of personality, if you like.
Yeah.
And I was reading a thing about dueling just the other night in the Highland tradition, and what I noticed was, and this was, I think, right across Europe, a lot of the guys who would duel did not want to kill their opponent. It was more about, okay, look, I've cut your ear off, let's stop. I mean, McBain's last fight, I think he finished it with a Dusak or a falchion.
Yeah.
Where he just basically bludgeoned the guy because he wouldn't stop and he didn't want to kill him.
Yeah.
So there's that sense of honor with that simplicity of technique as well. I think that's what people are missing, because the martial arts no longer have that sense of, it comes back to the ego. We're going to end up talking about what we talked about the last time, which is the ego. So, but I think we've talked about that enough, and I could talk about this topic all day long, as I'm sure you can. But we're talking about simplicity, which brings us back to the MacGregor system. The MacGregor system, from what I've seen, and I've only been reading about it recently, is just, it is what it is. It's very straightforward. It's fairly simple. You can apply it to virtually any weapon system. And we wanted to talk a little bit about that, didn't we?
Yes,
really?
yes.
So
the MacGregor method is something which was developed by Chris Thompson, so the founder of the Catherine Society. And the idea was to, it's basing on the lecture on the art of defense from, I think, 791 by Archibald MacGregor, fencing master or fencing lecturer from Paisley in Scotland, who was, doing kind of a tour, lecturing in the public about his thoughts about the art of defense, about swordsmanship. And he's also talking a lot about how the Highlanders did it back then. So he was also promoting a little bit more of maybe, an old style approach of how to defend yourself. And then he wrote it down, or it was printed as a book. So the lecture of the art of defense, and he's talking about different weapons. And basing on this book, the simplified, the quote is like, everything is a broadsword. And basing on this, it was like, okay, you take when it comes to fighting, you have basic principles, right? With weapons and without weapons. And then it depends on what kind of weapons you use, how long they are, how they feel, what attributes they have. But basically, when you compare an example, boxing and broadsword, then you have a weapon, your fists or your sword. And then you have distance and measure and timing. And then you have to guard yourself and to counter. Or you can do timed counters, like you slip the punch of your opponent and punch yourself. And the same you can do with the broadsword, differently, but the concept is the same, right? And now the idea was to have a system which gives you the tools you need, taking your broadsword, basic fundamentals and basic principles, and adopt it on a different weapon. And that can be another historical weapon, which you don't train mainly. It can be a kind of a foreign weapon. So for example, you can use a tie dart and in the way of the MacGregor method. It can also be an improvised weapon or a modern weapon in some way. So every hand-to-hand combat weapon you can imagine. And the idea is to adopt your principles of swordsmanship on this weapon you maybe never used before. And the idea is, on the one hand, it's just for fun. So in modern times, you can, widen your horizon in trying out other things. Historically speaking, it's a little bit like what we see in Donald McBain. So the method could also be called the McBain method if you want to. It would be also a good name, because we know Donald McBain has a lot of short but good advices and tips on, if you have facing a Spaniard with his rapier and his dagger, and if you have to use the rapier and the dagger, and when you have a spadroon, and then you are attacked by a guy with a broadsword and targe, then wrap your coat around your arm. So he's all these real life experience tips, but he doesn't teach a new system for it. He just has his big chapter on small sword and a chapter on backsword and something on spadroon or shearing sword, and then he just goes with some smaller, quicker chapters. So this is a quarterstaff, you hold it like this, and then you do this, and then you do that. So the idea itself is not new to adopt the principles. For example, Zachary Wilde, who was an English fencing master, published in 1711, his small book, he has small sword, backsword, quarterstaff, and wrestling. The wrestling part is quite cool, because this is, in my from what I know, quite an exception in this time to have a manual with a wrestling section. Quite a cool wrestling system he offers, but we can talk about this another time.
Yeah, the next one we'll do Zachary Wilde
Next one.
and Lonergan. We can talk about Lonergan and Wilde and Hope.
Yeah. So quickly speaking, when we go to his quarterstaff section, he tells you use all the guards and blows and chops and hits as you use them with the broadsword, and you use all your thrusts like with a small sword. So you train the small sword section, you train the backsword section, here's the quarterstaff, now you can use it. Okay, and here are like 8 or 10 lessons which are useful for you to train. And this is, so you can train his lessons on its own, but you can also just take your small sword and backsword knowledge and start using the quarter stuff, listening to the little advices he gives you. And this concept is the same way we use the MacGregor method, so people can explore weapons, also weapons we don't have a lot or no really source material for, like the Highland Dirk or the two-handed sword, commonly known as a claymore. We don't have a how-to manual to use it, but if you want to explore it on a practical route, of course with some speculation, then the MacGregor method gives you the guidance how to do it.
So it's about fundamentals, isn't it? Learning principles. That's what MacGregor's about. And then expanding those principles across a whole range of everything from long staffs to empty hands and wrestling ultimately.
Yeah, right.
And I mean that applies to the traditional Thai arts as well, because if you look at Muay Thai, a lot of the physical weapons, the elbows specifically, and the way they're used are very similar to the way Darby's used.
Yeah.
The angles in which we cut with the elbows are very similar, in fact, to Krabi Krabong. The only slight adjustment you have to make is with the footwork, with the stance. In Thai, in Muay Thai, you're more upright, although you have a curve in the spine. With the Krabi Krabong, you're slightly lower, which makes it a lot more sense when people are waving swords and of course, the guys would have been fighting sometimes on wet ground and sometimes on dry ground. So the stance is going to change with regard to that.
Yeah.
And obviously that's going to be the same with any system. The environment's going to slightly alter maybe your footwork, but the principles are the same, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you take, for example, the cutlass exercise of Angelo, as far as I know, Angelo never was, member of a ship and never fighting in naval combat, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So I, like Lieutenant Pringle Green, has much more practical advices on using the cutlass. However, Angelo's cutlass system, basing on his Highland broadsword method, is just a simple guide to learn the basics, to learn how to cut and guard properly with footwork. So you have the basics, and then on that you can adopt, or you can, it's like you learn boxing and wrestling, these are your basics, and then you go to a combatives club and learn situational awareness and all these stress drills with close quarter combat, defending yourself against weapons. So you have a base, and then you have the special environments, the situational context. And I think this is something, for example, with Angelo and the cutlass exercise. To learn the MacGregor method, we divide into 4 families. So to make it easier, because you can train the MacGregor method on your own without training Highland broadsword. So it has everything as a method for itself. But of course, it's also a tool for those who train broadsword already to adopt their skills on other weapons. And the 4 families are the way to work through this material, and and very often historical manuals are used within these technical concepts. And sometimes these concepts based on another weapon, which are adopted on this concept. So to jump quickly into it, for example, we start with the first family is the so-called cudgel family, which means like this Irish blackthorn walking stick I have, which is a sword length stick or other weapon. So it can be another sword. So for example, you train with a Highland broadsword, and of course you can use the same system as it's shown in the manuals with a cavalry saber or with a naval cutlass. You still have a sword-like object you are using, right? And the same is with a stick. But of course here you have to keep in mind you don't have an edge to cut with, you don't have a point to thrust with, and of course you don't have hand protection. So you have to adopt a little bit. But in the base, it's the same. As you know, in my YouTube channel, I started now a cudgeling lesson series to explain a little bit more. And Chris Thompson already has some good videos on how to use a walking stick or simple stick of like 100 centimeters, so sword lengths, one-handed sword lengths sticks, how to use them. And of course, you cannot only use the sword-like movements. You can also use movements like with a pike or with a quarterstaff or with a bayonet. So you have two-handed thrusts and whatnot. And so you start to adopt your swordsmanship on the stick and then explore the attributes of this stick, its advantages and disadvantages and differences. And then you can use this kind of stick. And I think the stick is a good tool to have the cudgel family, because you learn how to use something which is not a sword and has not a good basket hilt to protect your hand. And to be honest, this is something which is really a struggle for people like us who are training with a basket hilt broadsword. As soon as a basket hilt is gone, because having a sword without a proper hilt is just a stupid idea, in my opinion. But if it happens to be like this, then you have to adopt to it. So why not pick up a stick and train these movements already with a stick and learn how to protect your now unprotected hand? And of course, we have the adoption of swordsmanship on a walking stick already in some of the historical manuals. So like Sinclair is saying, my system is for swordsmanship on the battlefield, for the duel. You can use it with a single stick for sports. You can even use it with a cutlass in the Navy. And of course, you can defend yourself with a stick. So, I think Rowers, for example, he has even a small chapter on, okay, here comes how to adopt this skill on the stick, because with a stick, you have to keep in mind this and this and that. So we already have the idea of adopting swordsmanship to walking stick or something like that.
I think Keith Farrell sort of uses Roworth in his broadsword manual, the book that Keith Farrell wrote on Scottish broadsword and single stick. In fact, there's as much about single stick in there as there is about sword. But obviously the two work hand in hand quite well. Yeah. And I mean, in Britain, there was a massive tradition of single stick training, which a lot of people don't know about. And I've recently spoken to people who do eskrima, and I'll say, well, we have an indigenous system of stick fighting in the UK, and Europe have their own single stick traditions. You know, the Wasters in Poland and so on. The Polkati, isn't it? Called Polkati.
Yeah.
And they're sort of they're quite shocked. They're like, oh, right. Yeah. And then they come to the realization that quite a lot of the modern eskrima and Kali was actually it was adopted by the Philippines when the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the Europeans invaded their islands, you know. And they probably saw what we were doing with swords and went, oh, we'll do that. That's pretty good. And then absorbed it into their culture. You know, the number system, for example, is purely European, isn't it? I think I'm right in saying teaching using a number system. It didn't appear in the Philippines until, you know, much later, after the invasions. So it's wherever you go in the world, it's those fundamental principles are the key thing to making the system effective. And I think people are always surprised that, you know, the techniques you use with a sword can be applied to obviously a stick or a cudgel. Yeah. The kubotan, you know, the old kubotan, I mean, an incredible piece of kit, a brilliant weapon, if you know what you're doing with it. And of course, daggers, knives, dirks, and skendu, and so on, including the kukri. I include the kukri amongst that. Although it's a beautiful hacking weapon, it's not very good for thrusting. It's good for hacking things off. A bit like a broadsword.
Maybe that's why the Gurkhas and the Highland regiments, you know, they were getting quite good along together on the battlefield.
Well, the Gurkhas were so good, we made them our friends. You know, they were our enemies, and we realized
we don't want to fight against them. We want to have them as our allies.
Join us, please. Don't fight us. Yeah, my friend served with the Gurkha regiment in Afghanistan, and he was the officer, and he said, what an incredible bunch of guys, you know. They just wanted to die in battle. Crazy.
Living.
So the four families, we started with the cudgel, obviously.
So then we have the so-called double family. So there you can take the broadsword and targe principles, of course, and also other offhand weapons we know from historical times, like the basket-hilted parry dagger and the bugler, which stage gladiators still used. And then you can adopt it for example, you can say I take my cudgel, and now I use a smaller cudgel as the offhand weapon and experiment with that, for example, because we know the Irish had such kind of shorter cudgels as well. And then you can use, a longer stick and adopt the the double weapon system on this in a way as it is used to be. Or you can also say, okay, for example, in self-defense, I have some kind of stick or maybe a hammer with me, and then I use my backpack as an emergency shield in some way.
Yeah.
Because the MacGregor method, for me personally, it's not very much about modern self-defense, because I think this is something you should train separately with people who really know this thing, especially about how to avoiding these situations and to train awareness and the psychology. But if you want to, you could adopt this on modern self-defense tools as well. But I mostly see it from this historical perspective, however. So this is a double weapon family. So just two tools to use, adopting from the broadsword and Targe material mostly. And then we have the so-called staff family. That means all kind of pole arms, like a long staff, like a hiking staff of 120, 130, 140 centimeters, for example. So, or even then you can take quarter staff where we have historical material for its use. Of course, you can feed your basic principles of the broadsword with this, and then you will see, for example, with Zachary White, oh, this guy was already using his backsword principles with the quarter staff. So easy for me now to adopt from my broadsword material on the quarter staff.
Yeah.
And then again, you can also explore weapons like the Highlanded two-handed sword, the great sword, commonly known as Claymore, even so as Paul Wagner and Chris Thompson found out the term might not be 100% correct, but there's a lot of discussion. The popular name everybody knows. When you say a broadsword, they know, yeah, this is a one-handed sword with a basket hilt. And when you say Highland broadsword, and when you say a Claymore, then they think about the two-handed sword. Yeah. So I have no issue with using the term, and I use it myself. So if you want to use a Claymore, we don't have a manual how to do so. And so, of course, you can say, okay, I take some German longsword source material, and I take some Iberian montante material or Italian spadone, because the Claymore is somewhere in between as a weapon, not as long as a montante, but it's still not thrust, like the German longsword, very much also for thrusting. Yeah. So I mix this up, but I can also use my Highland broadsword skills. And this is something I was experimenting with a lot the last 2 or 3 years, how to adopt the Highland broadsword skills on the two-handed sword. Right. And you can use, for example, Thomas Page's equilibrio quite well. So his body mechanics of how to use the Highland broadsword and also broadsword and Targe, you can adopt it quite well on the two-hander.
So it does function well with the two-handed sword then.
Yeah. You can do this equilibrio exercise when working through the guards and stepping wide and narrow. When you do this with a broadsword and Targe and you keep the bows together, so just imagine you have your hands forward and now you have a two-handed sword. And you can do inside guard, outside guard, hanging guard, and so on and so on. And move with your body, because Thomas Page is very much about this body movement of the sword, the complete body mechanics. There's a 6-part workshop video in Paul Wagner's channel about equilibrio and Thomas Page. It's great. If you want to learn about equilibrio and Thomas Page, check this out. Absolutely, this out. And then you can adopt it two-handed sword. And then, of course, there is some speculation what you can put into it. And for example, if you take the montante reglas, there you have a situation where you face 1 or 2 guys armed with a sword and a shield. And then you do, for example, these sweeping leg cuts and go up to a hanging guard and then leg cut here. And this is a situation where you say, yeah, okay, in the Highlands, you might have a period where the two-handed Scottish greatsword might face broadsword and Targe, because these were overlapping from the period. These weapons were overlapping. Yeah. You know, for example, at Killiecrankie, it is said that at least half a dozen claymores were still in use. That is not much, but you might face with your broadsword and Targe a guy with a two-handed sword. This is, you know, and there you can put this Iberian Montante Regla and transfer it on the situation of a claymore facing two guys armed with broadsword and targe, in example. So you can pick from other traditions and put something on if you want to explore something more.
Yeah, there's so many different traditions that you've got to choose from, isn't there, really? And as you say, because there wasn't a great deal of information written down, we have to, it's all down to conjecture and speculation, isn't it? But at the end of the day, you know, a human being can only move in so many different ways effectively. So I guess it's, you know, it becomes an individual thing once the fundamentals are learned. I see this all the time with my guys. I'll train them all very similarly with the basics, but they always turn out with a different style of fighting that is very much their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously what's going to happen in most fighting arts anyway, including, you know, including the way you use a sword, a dirk, a cudgel, or whatever it is you pick up. You know, a newspaper, you know, a rolled up magazine, you know, if you know what you're doing, it's a weapon, you know. I mean, a credit card is an incredible edged weapon, you know, if you know what you're doing with it. It's very close range, but nevertheless, you can do some significant damage with a credit card, as one of my students once found out. But he was attacked at a cash point.
Okay.
And he'd done an edged weapons course with me for a weekend, and he was assaulted on a cash point machine, and he took the card out and he turned around to the guy, and the guy said, "If you don't give me that, I'm going to stab you." He said, "I couldn't see a knife." He said, "But it was dark." He said, "So I just slashed him across the face. I held the card tight and slashed him across the face, and he ran off screaming." And he brought the card in, Heiko, and it was ripped. He'd hit him that hard with the card. The card must have torn his face. And he said, "That saved my life." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "What was it, a number 4?" And he said he thinks it was a number 6. You know, but if even the slightest bit of training, people don't seem to realize this. At least that's what I find. You explain to people, you know, look, you see this elbow that comes down there? Imagine you've got an edge weapon or a cudgel. Boom, same angle.
Yeah.
Same thing, just more range.
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, yeah. I'm teaching you fundamental principles, guys. That's what I'm teaching." And I think that's what people like Lonergan, Matthewson, Page, McBain, that's what they're doing. They're teaching fundamentals. And obviously these guys knew how to make it work. Certainly McBain did. I mean, he fought until he was 62, I think. Was it 62, his last fight? And that's going some, you know, he had a lot of battles in his time as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think people need to read. People are often keen on reading Musashi and people like that because it's very exotic. But we've got people like McBain. I mean, you read McBain, and his first fight, he was terrified. You know, he expressed all the same, like all of us. You know, my God, I'm going to get killed, so he ran away. You know, and then he worked at it and became better and better and better.
Yeah.
And
I would say he's
he's
kind of a Geoff Thompson of his time.
Oh yeah.
And you learn something from about real fighting and life and basic principles and also life experiences he's sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they need to make a film about him, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even better, a complete TV show. You know, like
like a series. Yeah. Yeah, well, hey, should we start writing?
I think we have to cut here because my phone is calling.
Okay, so you've got to get off, haven't you?
No, I don't have to get off. I just have to.
Okay.
If maybe something turns, so we might stop the recording for a moment.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so we've got Heiko back. He had his important call. So we were talking about self-defense and close quarter combat, which brings us nicely on to
the Highland Dirk, which is kind of resembles for me the fourth family of the MacGregor method, which is a system called the stick family, meaning a short stick in that way. So everything around 50, 60 centimeters, so not a sword-like object anymore, but for example, more like something like this, okay? So you can still swing it like a sword, but of course it's a short cudgel, and therefore you have to transfer the energy into the hit a little bit different. And of course, everything which is smaller, so MacGregor method would also be your old cell phone being used as emergency Kubotan, for example. But or of course here the pen, obviously.
Pen. Yeah.
But yeah, for me the main weapon I explore, and many in the Cateran Society do, is the Highland dirk, so the famous Scottish dagger or big knife. This is the weapon we decided is our main weapon, because you learn everything about a short weapon when you use this, and also you have a lot of self-defense aspect within it, even historical context. Yeah, so let's talk about the dirk.
Yeah, let's do.
Yeah, just for a quick overview, because I mostly want to talk about the practical applications, because about the history and the culture behind the dirk, there's many books were written and there are many people who are really experts about it. But from a practical point of view, we can learn already a lot about the use of the Highland dirk, because we don't have a how-to manual, but we have some written material, some battlefield descriptions, some clan stories, especially about ambushes, because this was a weapon not for fencing. It was a weapon for attacking, for killing on the battlefield, and also for ambushes mostly. So you would not, you know, pull this out the sheath and say, okay, guard and let's fight. No, you would pull this out the sheath, have it ready to step and attack and thrust, and, you know, just like knife ambushes are today, unfortunately, still. However, there was also some culture about it. So as far as I know, when you were an adult, a full member of the clan, you would be allowed to carry the dirk. And sometimes it's also called an everyday knife, which you would use for bushcrafting and hunting and food preparation. But I think when we look at surviving dirks, these might be more like the higher ranking clansmen surviving weapons, which you would keep somewhere to give it to, you know, your children and grandchildren. So the average Highlander might also have used a big knife, which might, in the simplest way, be kind of a big kitchen knife. I don't know if they also call it a dirk, but this would be the everyday average man's dirk in a way, where you would prepare food and also, because of course with a dirk you can of course cut your meat, you can of course prepare your hunting game maybe. This one is I think so you can see it. This one has a blade more of this kind of Highland dirks, which were made from cut down backsword blades. Yeah. But of course, we also have these dirks with very triangular, very pointy blades. So these were blades where you can see they are optimized for thrusting, in my opinion.
I think I've got one which is of that same.
Yeah, right. This is a Hanwei, the Hanwei dirk, which has this triangle blade, and this is kind of. I mean, you can of course prepare some firewood with it. Because it's a sharp object. Yeah. But you see, the blade is not optimized for that purpose. No. However, we can take the design of the weapon and make assumptions on its use. So we have some written text. So Archibald MacGregor, for example, describes this quickly. He says that, for example, gives us some points about how it was used mostly in this kind of ice pick or dagger grip or reverse grip. And if you look at the design of the handle, these handles were quite short. Most of the modern, like Hanwei or Cold Steel or Windlass replicas, the handles are most of the time too long, because I think they are basing on more Victorian period Highland dirks, where the design changed into this typical what you know today as a military dirk. But before that, in the clan period, the grips were quite short, so they can fit into your hand completely. And now you don't see any grip anymore. And you would put your thumb on the back of the pommel or your index finger. And this is example. We have two pictures at least one from Ireland and one from later from Scotland, where you can see this holding the dirk alongside your forearm, maybe using it even to block an incoming blow. You can do this, for example, when you have the broadsword, then you can use this as kind of an emergency shield, like a mini Targe. And of course, you can use this also in this kind of knife grip, or because it's quite short, saber grip, using cutting, slashing, stabbing, and whatnot from this. But you can really see that this is optimized to have it prepared on your belt, pull it out, and stab. Just similar to medieval daggers, which might be not the only, but one forefather of this, because many people say the medieval ballock dagger or bollock dagger was the forefather of this, and maybe also the medieval rondel dagger. But we already had in Ireland in earlier times, there are these so-called skeans, so quite long short sword, like in kind of dirk design, long Irish daggers. And I think that there might be kind of a mix of the rondel dagger, bollock dagger, and skean, which mixed into this, finally transferring into this kind of typical Highland dirk we know. So I think this is a design background, a mix of different influences. So we know at least that this one was used in a specific way most of the time as a fighting weapon.
And it was used in conjunction with the Targe as well, where it would be held in the left hand with the Targe and the dirk behind it.
This is something which is also described. Many people who start to train broadsword and Targe, they already think about, I put the dirk in my left hand. But in the beginning, it's more a distraction than a help. So you have to be a little bit already experienced with broadsword and Targe before you put this in your hand. And then the design, I can show it to you with my Targe here. Then the design is important, because about using the dirk behind the shield, so you can see it. Quite often you have these round kind of leather grips and handles. Some had the idea that the Highlanders might have pushed their hands through it and then dirk like that. But first of all, this is pressing here on my thumb. I don't have a good grip. And also my hand is exposed here behind the edge. So I don't like this theory. And if you take this, because they say, okay, if you have a round handle like this and not a flat handle, then you don't have a good grip. But if you look at this, you take the dirk with its typical grip shape, put it in this hand, this sits totally tight. And this is different. So this is, I mixed my windlass, my sharp windlass dirk blade with the grip of a reenactment dirk a friend sent me. I put it together, so now it's more authentical. But I had already the armor class dirk in my hands and another very nice made dirk from Scotland, where this worked even better with this. Here you already see how this is pressing here with the pommel and the grip perfectly. And now I can hold it quite tight. That's not a problem at all.
That's a perfect fit.
So,
and the dirk extends quite far out of the Targe.
Absolutely. So you have a little bit more of a diameter to if you have to parry and maybe miss the blade with your Targe a bit. So if it slides down here, you still have something. Of course, it's quite good if you come close to step forward and thrust instead of punching with a shield edge. You can use this, or you can a grapple, because on the battlefield this can happen quite quickly, that someone is too close and wants to grapple you, so you can stab in with this. What I also realized, which is quite well through experimentation, is that you can hook away thrusts quite well. So if you imagine, for example, the musket with a bayonet as an opponent, or a pike or spear-like thing, or even a thrust with a sword, you can hook this away quite well with the dirk over the edge. And of course, another practical thing is, if I lose my broadsword, because it flies out of my hand, I lose grip, or it breaks, or it stuck in the bone of a poor opponent, and I can pull it out. Then I have it already ready to use it with my free hand, because when I'm in the battle, of course, I don't want to say, oh, okay, I lost my sword. Now I throw away my Targe and use my Dirk. Oh,
No,
I will still keep my Targe and switch quickly and have it ready here.
Yeah.
And we know that the Highlanders used the Dirk together with the Targe, not only because it makes sense, but we have at least one story about Reynold of the Shield, who used this combination in a duel.
Mm-hmm. And it makes a nice combination as well.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'd never seen that grip before, and I was always wondering how you could hold a Dirk and your Targe at the same time, but it makes perfect sense. The ergonomics of the Dirk fit perfectly well with the Targe. Is that the normal, just so people, because obviously a lot of people won't have know much about the Targe. It's leather, it's wood. It would actually absorb musket balls as well in combat, wouldn't it? It was an incredibly strong piece of kit. Was that you? I think some people would look at that Targe and expect it to be bigger. I know when people have seen my Targe, they're going, "Oh, I thought it would be bigger." Was that the average size of a Targe? Quite a small?
I would say so, that that around 50 centimeters in diameter would be the average diameter. So you of course you would have bigger ones and maybe also smaller ones. There's an interesting video made by Paul Wagner about Targe making, where he also talks about different Targe shapes and size, because this would be what people expect from a Targe typically. But of course, there are also Targes we can see on pictures, and I think there are also some surviving, which would be more made from steel. So steel Targes, like a classical rotella of the Italians, more like with a bowl-shaped Targe. Those exist too. And it is said that in earlier times, before the rise of firearms, Targes would be in diameter a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, but lighter then, to be better against against arrows from bows and against swords and pikes and everything, but not too big, not really like a big Viking shield, but bigger. And that they later became smaller and more compact, also to be more robust against, for example, pistol and musket shots. And I think there's at least one Targe which was found with a musket ball still inside the edge, the rim of the Targe. And if we go to historical manuals, at least Donald McBain says the Targe will prevent you and protect you against all sides, all forms of blows, chops, thrusts, and shot. So he mentions that you have a shield that might cover you against a musket ball. Of course, not from the closest distance, but as we all know, muskets were not so accurate. Of course, the wider the distance is to the enemy lines, and the less hard the impact of a musket ball would be. What I would like to do, so it would be an experiment. So what I first need is money. So I can ask a Targe maker to make a beautiful, solid, robust, authentical Targe. Like this one behind me, because this is quite a good one. And then we take this Targe and do all kind of nasty things with it. Also having someone who shoot it.
Fire musket ball.
Of a kind of, what can this thing really take? So a historical experiment, making a beautiful, expensive Targe and then trying to destroy it. But that would be really great to shoot from different. And I think if you hold the Targe, you should hold the Targe on an angle. So you have this kind of deflection, and you have leather and you have wood. So I think this kind of shield can take a lot and can protect you a little bit from a musket ball quite well. But I would love to have a final proof with this kind of experiment. So maybe I make some kind of crowdfunding. Let's destroy a Targe together,
Yeah,
or
let's
something.
destroy a Targe. I'm sure there's lots of people would want to fund that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
what a shame. Oh,
Yeah.
well, look, this is a good time to sort of start wrapping this up now. We've talked for an hour, over an hour now, which has been great. And I think we'll return, our return visit. I think if we look at detail about a couple of names that you mentioned there, particularly Zach Wilde, and I think I mentioned Matthew Sinners Lonergan as well, and talk about some of the treatises, I think, so people get an idea of what's actually out there.
Yeah.
And how it fits in with training. Yeah. I think that would be a great idea.
Absolutely.
How does that sound, Heiko?
Sounds very good. To wrap it up for the Highland Dirk, I just wanted to say, if you want, so the viewers out there, if you want to learn more about the Highland Dirk, about its design, I can highly recommend this older book by John Wallace about Scottish swords and dirks. And it has a small chapter about the Highland Dirks where you can see all the designs. So if you want to have a good reference book, this small older book, you might get it somewhere used. About the history and the use, Chris Thompson wrapped it all up in this little book, which is unfortunately out of print, but maybe
you can't. I've tried to get that. You can't get it.
Yeah, maybe you can get still a copy, because there's a lot of the backgrounds, the historical backgrounds, the small puzzle pieces we find. So it's still speculation how to use the Dirk, but he put together quite well all little details he could find. And then again, of course, there's my YouTube channel with the Highland Dirk video lesson series, which was originally only available on Patreon, but because of the lockdown, I thought I share it with the public. And so the first 6 or 7 lessons are already out there. And another book for reference, which is quite new, is this one. But
Harvey Withers.
Yeah.
He has Harvey lives 5 miles away from me in Birmingham.
Ah, that's great. So please drive there and ask. Tell him that the book is quite good. I really like his work in general. Well, but it was a little bit sad that there are, of course, much more Victorian period than, for example, 18th century Dirks.
Yeah,
it is still a good reference book. With good photos and a lot of pictures of historical Dirks. But it was a little bit a shame that I said, there are a lot of Victorian area Dirks inside, which are of course very collectors like them a lot. Personally, many consider this design in the Victorian period of the Dirk a little bit, like a rape of the original Dirk. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's more ornamental, isn't it?
It's more ornamental, and this is also, I think, the period where they started to, which many modern makers do wrong. So, like big companies, I will show it to you with my Dirk here. They create the sheath. The handles are mostly too big, which is also, I think, partly fault of many Victorian period Dirks. And they create the sheath always so that you, if you are right-handed, carry it on the left hip, because you don't have a sword, and you pull it out like a knife. That's okay if you want to cut the haggis on Burns night, or the birthday cake, or the wedding cake. But it's good if you find, and there the windlass, I think primitive Scottish Dirk it is called, was good because originally it's designed to be pulled out like a typical knife, like so. But it fits on the other side as well. This was the reason I bought it, because now I can, as a right-handed swordsman, I can carry it on my right hip, or carry it between my legs in the middle and pull it out with my right hand. ready to step, because this is the way I want to use the Dirk in this kind of ambush emergency situation. So this is just said. I just ordered the armor class Dirk.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I think, the design of the grip. Someone who is really good with Dirk designs, historic Dirk designs, told me that the grip design is not 100% authentical, but I care mostly for it from a fighting perspective. So from a fighting perspective, it is perfect, especially with using it with a Targe together, fitting in the hand. So I'm very much looking forward to maybe present this one in like 12 weeks or so, if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
You know how it works. So yeah, but I think this is one of the Dirks which are quite affordable, still very authentical, especially from a fighty perspective. So I'm looking forward to this.
That's from armor class, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put some of the links that you've already mentioned, the books that you've mentioned, and the links to your YouTube channel as well.
Thank you.
In the description, and we can keep this momentum going. But
Yeah.
I'd just like to say thanks so much again, Heiko, for taking up your morning and getting me out of bed really early. I have things to do, and I look forward to doing part 4.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Yes,
I know you are. You're the only person I know who talks more than me. It's great.
Yeah.
My students are always saying, "Bob, shut up, shut up."
What can I say?
Okay, thanks so much, Heiko.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.